Oh, really? Are you the star of the show now? Is this the trip show? Excuse me. Hi, my name is Adriana, and today I will be doing my reading wrap-up for the months of April and May. So overall, in the months of April and May, I've read/listened to 17 books. So I'm going to go just in chronological order. I don't necessarily rate everything I read, just based on different factors. So if I have a rating for it, I'll give it. If not, I'll just talk about it a little bit. So the first book I want to cover is an audiobook I finished up in early April, and that is The End Is Always Near by Dan Carlin. If you haven't heard of Dan Carlin, he is a history podcaster covering all sorts of different areas of history. His podcasts are incredible and so detailed and so in-depth. I ended up being a little disappointed in his book. It's definitely not as detailed and in-depth. It's only a 7-hour audiobook as compared to some of his 15-hour series, and it is a lot more broad. So it definitely doesn't get into detail, but I think if you haven't listened to a lot of Dan Carlin's work before, it could definitely be a really good kind of introductory book. The events he covers in this book are stuff he brings up a lot in a lot of his other podcasts, stuff like the Greek Dark Ages, and covers a lot about the development of the atomic bomb during World War II. I mean, it was an interesting book, and if you're interested in history, I think you would really enjoy it, but if you're an avid Dan Carlin fan, I don't know if you'll like it as much. Jumping into my first physical read of the month of April. The month of April was just the Grishaverse for me. So I got ebook copies of the Shadow and Bone trilogy and the Six of Crows duology, but I ended up getting a special edition Shadow and Bone afterwards. But I 100% jumped on that Netflix show bandwagon, read the entire Grishaverse. I have a reading vlog of me reading the trilogy if you're interested in that. I super enjoyed the trilogy. I missed out on it the first time around. I liked them. I had a good time. If you're interested on some of my more in-depth thoughts about the Shadow and Bone trilogy, you can check out my reading blog. The next book I listened to was A Brief History of Time by Stephen Hawking. It is part just straight science book and part kind of professional memoir. So the first half of it is just kind of building those building blocks of Newtonian physics, atomic physics, physical chemistry, quantum mechanics, just kind of that stuff, to eventually get into his deeper work of astronomical universal theories. I don't know, like up into that first half of the book when he's going through like kind of some basic quantum mechanics stuff, I was there, I was with him, but then he gets into like his work specifically of how the universe expands and how that affects time and space. My brain was done. I was just not there anymore, not with it. I think if you do have a bit of a science background, you'll probably enjoy this more. I think if you have no science background, you could probably learn a bit, but it's definitely going to be a lot harder to keep up. And I think especially, I listened to it as an audiobook. If you don't have a science background, I wouldn't really suggest doing it that way. I'd suggest reading it physically, because you can go back and reread parts that you didn't understand the first time, and that's not as easy to do with an audiobook. The next audiobook I listened to was Daisy Jones and the Six. I wasn't particularly interested in like the plot or kind of the synopsis or blurb. I just heard that it had a full cast for the audiobook, and I thought that sounded really interesting. I'd never listened to an audiobook like that before, so I decided to pick it up from the library, and I ended up really enjoying it. I'm definitely gonna have to read some more of Taylor Jenkins Reid's work. I thought it was very heartfelt, the end definitely tugged on my heartstrings. I was teary-eyed. I was teary-eyed at the end there. So I liked it. The next physical book I read was Six of Crows. Obviously that is the first book in the Six of Crows duology, the kind of spin-off sequel series to Shadow and Bone. I, like everybody else, ended up enjoying the Six of Crows duology more so than the Shadow and Bone trilogy, but I mean, I think that's also due to the fact that I was reading them as an adult, and the Six of Crows is definitely aged up a little bit, and it's definitely more of a kind of character study than it is a full plot driven. Even though there's a lot of plot happening, the plot kind of feels secondary to the character development and digging into these characters and their backgrounds and why they are the way they are. And I think that was either 4 or 5 star. I I don't remember any of my ratings. I'm not huge on my rating system, but I keep it just for funsies, I guess. The next audiobook I listened to was Sapiens. I have never taken like a straight up anthropology class or anything like that. So it was really interesting for me to kind of get this introductory survey of kind of this anthropologist take on how humans developed as a species. So I definitely want to dig into kind of, I think, some other people's works. I think a lot of what's in this book is not necessarily opinion, but it's only one source. So I definitely want to check out some other kind of anthropological sources, maybe get a little bit deeper into it now that I have some of this vocabulary that I learned in this book, and hopefully be able to transition into something a little bit more academic or deep. I don't know. I enjoyed it. I mean, that's another like 4-ish resource kind of book. So the next book I read was Crooked Kingdom, and I was definitely teary-eyed at the end of Crooked Kingdom. It is the second book in the duology of The Six of Crows, and I mean, like I had said about Six of Crows, so much of this book is based on, you know, characters and how they develop, and so you get so invested in these characters and their lives and what's going on, and you just want them to live great lives and happily ever after, and it's a lot. It's a whole thing. Whereas like Six of Crows seems to be more focused on like the individuals and their kind of backgrounds and why they are the way they are. Crooked Kingdom seems to focus more on the relationships between all the characters, so you get to kind of see that in after getting all of the kind of individual stuff from the first book. So I think it's a really well written duology. I think they pair together so beautifully. I know a lot of people read just this duology and not Shadow and Bone, but I personally think my enjoyment of Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom was elevated by already being familiar with this world and kind of the magic system and everything else. So I think it is worth it to read the trilogy. I mean, the trilogy is such a fast read. Like, you can get through, I got through the entire trilogy in like 10 days, and I'm a very slow reader. Like, it usually takes me a while to get through a book, so you can rip through them real quick, and then you get to spend some more kind of time and, you know, slow down with the Six of Crows duology. I kind of was burnt out on the Grishaverse after binging after binging 5 books in a row and watching the show and the whole thing. So I took a total 180 and read Dragon Teeth by Michael Crichton. I have a dedicated book review for that book on my channel if you're interested, but it is a historical fiction on the era of Western, I guess US Western history, called the Bone Wars. So in the 1800s, people were discovering fossils. It was crazy. It was this new kind of part of science, and it got really weird. So I really enjoyed this book, and I have some not negative things to say about it, but there's some stuff that held me back from giving it a 5-star. I ended up giving it a 4.5 star, and I go into that more in the book review. But I would recommend, if you're interested in history or Michael Crichton's writing, it's so fun. It's like slow paced and then like medium paced, but like you're so invested the whole time, and it's just, instead of focusing on a bunch of characters, you really only get one main character that you kind of sit with and learn a lot about. So that's fun too, to kind of go from something so character heavy like Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom into something that's more focused on one character and his development and his journey. So yes, I enjoyed that book a lot, and it was a great palate cleanser after the Grishaverse. After that, I listened to Where Dreams Descend for the Shelf This Book Club that I am a part of. It's kind of funny because I thought that this was going to be a really popular book within our book club. We have a lot of kind of YA fantasy readers, and I was not really enjoying it the time I was listening to it. I don't know, it's a debut novel, and I think it has a lot of debut novel problems. But anyways, maybe I should get into the synopsis of what this book even is. It is a young magician named Kalia, and she goes to the big city to join a magician competition, and the owner of the club she worked at was very possessive and controlling, and so she's trying to keep hidden from him and win this competition, and magicians are disappearing. And for as great of a setup as that is, I don't know if it was executed super well. There is I think this is going to be like a trilogy or at least a duology. There is another one coming out and I might pick it up. I don't know. I mean, I think the magic system the author set up is really interesting and cool. And I think there's a lot of potential within this world, but I just don't know if it was quite there for me. So I think I ended up giving this like a 2.5 or 3 star. It's just kind of middle of the road. Like, I didn't hate it, I just didn't love it. The next book I read was The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. I really enjoyed this book. This book was so much fun, and I knew I would. It's a good kind of mystery, thriller, fun, YA, just poor girl gets called in after this rich man dies, and she ends up inheriting all of his stuff out from under his family. So it's just, and craziness ensues after that. It's all of these young men who are super accomplished trying to figure out why this young woman inherited all of their family estate and just trying to get through that. It's fun. And there's another one coming out and I will definitely be reading that, and I enjoyed this so much. The next book I read was White Fragility. And this one wasn't necessarily a difficult read, but it definitely like hit me pretty hard. Like, this book was written specifically for people like me. So I grew up in an area with not a lot of cultural diversity. So yeah, I definitely felt it when reading this book. I think it was, you know, a really good one for me to pick up. I try to keep, you know, learning and growing as far as my anti-racism journey goes, and that's not necessarily like something I want to get super in-depth to on this channel, but just personally trying to stay learning, growing, being a better person. And I think the part that hit me especially about this book was this author had been touring around. The author is white and she is a diversity trainer for like kind of a consulting company, I think. And so she was traveling around and doing some lectures and whatnot with one of her coworkers who was a Black woman, and they had been traveling all over the country and they were exhausted and they decided they wanted to take a little vacation together to kind of blow off some steam. And the author recommends Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, which is some place that I go to quite a bit. And so she tells her coworker, hey, let's go there. It's this beautiful resort town. It's on a lake. It's really beautiful. It'll be fun. There's lots of great restaurants, blah, 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 blah. And so this coworker looks up the area and realizes it's only like half hour, 45 minutes away from Hayden Lake, where the KKK still holds rallies and still exists, and there's neo-Nazis, and it's a mess, and it's part of the reason Idaho has such a bad reputation. And she said, okay, I realize it's probably a safe place, but just being in the proximity of people who are that visceral and hateful towards people like me, I don't want to go. And I and my friends are 100% aware of Coeur d'Alene's history and its geography and proximity to hateful groups like that, and we've made jokes about it before. Like, we joke about, you know, Coeur d'Alene is a place for rich, old, racist white people to go have a holiday, and I don't know, it hit me hard to recognize that I knew that that was there, but I guess made light of it. I don't know. It made me think a lot, which obviously is what the book is supposed to do. So the book accomplished its job. So the next book I read was Sluts and Whores by C.E. Hoffman, and I know I keep talking about this book and I will be doing a book review on it, but it is a collection of urban fantasy short stories focusing on sexuality and how it affects people, and sometimes not people, because, you know, urban fantasy. I ended up enjoying it a lot more than I thought I would. It was really different than stuff I normally read, so I'm really glad I picked it up. And like I said, I will be doing a dedicated book review on it soon, but it's coming, I promise. The next audiobook I listened to was Outliers, and this was kind of an interesting, I don't even know what realm of science you could talk about it, like maybe modern anthropology, but I don't even know, like culture studies? I don't know. But it was focusing on kind of what makes these outlier people, you know, the Bill Gates, the Connor McDavids, the Wayne Gretzky's, what are some other, like, why certain cultures seem to be better at math than others. I thought it ended up being really, really interesting and kind of different. I mean, I think one of the examples he goes to quite a bit is the, like, Canadian hockey players, the way their younger competitive divisions are split up is the cutoff age is January 1st. So if you were born on January 1st, you play with kids who are all younger than you. If you are born on December 31st, you play with kids who are all older than you. And just having that much of a difference in, you know, being a year older than a lot of the kids you're competing against can give you a head up when the scouts are looking for kids at ages 10 to 12 to put into the traveling Pee-wee leagues. And with that kind of edge up, you suddenly get put into these traveling leagues and you have better coaches, you play more, blah, 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 blah. And so when you get up to, like, the NHL, you realize that a lot of the Canadian players in the NHL have birthdays January, February, March. Kind of interesting that way, and just peeking into different examples like that and why we see some trends like this. Another one that really interested me was the way the Chinese language is structured as far as how the numbers work. They have a theory out there that that's what helps with learning math a little bit easier that way. I guess their numbers are more sequential, you know, how in English we have 1, 2, 3, but then we have 11, 12, 13. And so the numbers don't always match up correctly, like with 21, 22, 23. Probably not making any sense. But I mean, that part kind of resonated with me. I used to help proctor math, like competitive math events in high school. And one of the parts of the competition is you would have to read off math questions for the group of kids to write down an answer. So they'd have to listen to the question as you're reading it. And all of the formulas were always written out word by word. So instead of just seeing 1 + 1, it would be written out 1 + 1. And you wouldn't think that would make a whole lot of a difference, but when you've trained yourself, like especially by the time in high school, I had a really big interest in math, and so I kind of learned math structures in my head, and I don't look at math in words, I look at math in numbers and symbols. So to have to read math in words was always such a mindfuck. And I would always feel so bad because I'd be tripping over my words to these kids, when if I could just read it as a formula written out in numbers and symbols, I would have been able to speak it so much easier. So the next audiobook I listened to was How to Be Antiracist. Again, just another one trying to keep up. I thought this was super well written and super accessible. It was just really interesting to hear, I guess, about someone else's journey of reaching anti-racism and how different events in his life affected the way he saw himself and his community, and people not like himself and not in his community. So I really like that one. I think probably everybody at this point has read it. I think everybody picked it up last June when I probably should have read it, but I didn't. But you know, never too late to learn things. And then the last physical book I read in May was Percy Jackson's Sea of Monsters, just part of my reread of the whole series this year. What can I say? It's still so fun. I still love these characters and this world and everything about it. Like, it's just, it was such a big part of my childhood as, you know, a kid who was obsessed with Greek mythology. Being able to jump into a world of Greek mythology that was so accessible and so easy to see myself in was really nice. The last audiobook that I listened to in the month of May was Educated by Tara Westover. This is a memoir of a woman who grew up in a fundamentalist Mormon family in southeastern Idaho, and basically how schooling and education got her out of kind of a shitty situation. I mean, it was definitely hard to listen to. She dealt with a lot of abuse from her family, emotional and physical, so there's definitely some trigger warnings there. I don't know, it was very interesting to read. It's fun to listen to stories like that where someone uses education to get themselves out of such a crappy place, and it's very, you know, hopeful and heartwarming. So definitely kind of a tough read, but I think it's worth it. If you can get through the rough kind of trigger warning parts, I think it's definitely worth it. I really hope this woman writes more. I mean, she has a beautiful writing style, just really, she's She's really, really smart, and I really enjoyed the book quite a bit. That is all the books I read in March and April. Let me know if you have read any of these, what your thoughts were, if you agreed or disagreed with me about how I felt about them. And thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you on the next video.